Hi everyone, it's Ash from FPLHINTS here with what I'm hoping is my final wildcard draft ahead of the Gameweek 4 deadline. As always, if you're able to like, share and subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated. Right then, for those that have been following my draft developments during the international break, you've noticed that I did an initial mock draft, then I actually activated my wildcard, and then did the draft update. And since then, the draft has been relatively static, albeit with some minor tinkering here and there. I feel that I'm in a position now whereby the draft is more or less settled. At the same time, I reserve the right to make any changes right up until the FPL deadline. Of course, there are some peculiar anomalies this time around for this deadline, so I might be forced into making some unexpected changes. But I feel that the main structure and the actual thinking behind the draft itself is fairly set. And I've got the actual formation there. Now, that's not my default formation for the entirety of this wildcard draft. It's almost certainly going to be my formation if I proceed this way for Gameweek 4. So without further ado, let's get straight into it and reveal what this final draft looks like. And important caveat that if I was to make any changes beyond what you're about to see, I'll do my best to post them below the YouTube video, also on my X channel as well. So here goes. The first player that I'm going to bring up here, someone who I've been really monitoring a fair bit and someone who I've been scared not owning, it's Trent Alexander-Arnold. Watched him for those first 3 game weeks and he looked absolutely sensational, racked up a very high XGI, did very well during the international break as well. Liverpool also have a reasonable fixture run still at hand. And whilst with my first team before the Game Week 1 deadline, I had Kwanzaa, I had Jota, and I had Mohamed Salah, and of course then had to get rid of Kwanzaa before the price drop, had Jota and Salah. I felt that I wanted Trent, and the only way I was going to get Trent is ultimately I'd have to get rid of one of Jota or Mohamed Salah. So I feel that the accommodation of Trent in this team, there is that peace of mind that, okay, if Liverpool don't keep a clean sheet, then I've got him there for his attacking prowess. We know what he's capable of doing, and he is one of those players that has a very high ownership across elite managers and also within the FPL ownership overall. And yeah, that was one player who I just couldn't afford not to have, even though he's 7 million. And initially, with my wildcard tinkering, I contemplated not having a Liverpool defender, then I contemplated having Robertson, but I thought he's only a million more. So had to stretch the funds a little bit, but I had to make it make sense for me at the same time. So in comes Trent Alexander-Arnold as my premium defender. And that was something actually that was a hallmark of pretty much all of my drafts throughout preseason. I really didn't have a premium defender, but if there's one that I am going to get in, and I did toy with others who I'd classify as a premium, I'd say 5.5 or more, but he is, right up there with the top price, and he is 7 million for a reason. And I've got no doubt he'll get a price rise if he hits the ground running from Game Week 4 onwards. So the next player I've mentioned, Liverpool, no big surprises here. I had Mohamed Salah from the get-go. Many have now come to the realization that Mohamed Salah and Haaland together isn't a bad thing. So Mohamed Salah retains his berth in my final wildcard draft. On to my next player, someone I've had from the get-go, no big surprises. It's Mr. Inevitable himself, Haaland, absolutely sensational, back-to-back hat-tricks so early on, and I've been very fortunate in having both Mohamed Salah and Haaland in my team from Game Week 1, and it's helped me to be up in the top 500,000, 450,000 at the time of recording to be precise. And again, who's counting overall rank at this time of the season doesn't really matter. But then at the same time, having a good start is a head start in FPL. And I kind of feel that with them, those two players in particular, they've basically helped me cover a lot of bases, whereby my team was very attack heavy, and oddly enough, had the defense as a whole in FPL not been as great, I would have been ranked even higher. But remarkably, the defensive assets have been doing quite well this season. So I kind of feel I've gotten away with having both and a light defense. So Trent, Salah, and Haaland are essentially the spine of the team, and then you just add up the funds there as well. That's what 27 and a bit for Haaland and Salah. Add in Trent, that's more than a third of my budget on 3 players, which some would really be shocked at, but it's just the way I'm playing FPL this season. Haven't got any massive issues with that. So spine of my team, and I've got the peace of mind that if either of these players that you can see on screen have any injury issues or form issues, I can easily downsize them. It's harder to upsize to a Trent, a Salah, or a Haaland. Yeah, I can downsize easier if need be, like a Trent can become Robbo, Salah can be a De Bruyne, and then Haaland could be a Watkins, rather than the other way around, where you'd have to either save a lot of transfers or take immediate hits. And this draft that I'm constructing, kind of hoping that it has some sort of longevity as well, albeit there will be some short-term punts as well, and players who have shown some form early on. And it brings me onto the next forward. I'm going to Brighton, and in particular, it's João Pedro, who's had a really amazing start to the FPL season. He was a very popular pick for FPL managers at the start of this season, also at the start of last season as well. Very important to Brighton's attack. 2 very generous fixtures coming up for Brighton in Game Week 4 and Game Week 5 against newly promoted Ipswich and also Forest at home. I kind of felt that I wanted some sort of attacking Brighton cover, and João Pedro was the player that I wanted to basically go for. As a reminder, in terms of his goal involvements last season, he only had 12, and I've got no doubt that with the current way that he's been playing and his early form, he can well and truly exceed that. Talking of which, brings me on to my next forward, and I'm going to Brighton again, doing something very unorthodox and having 2 Brighton forwards in my starting 11. Again, I've talked about the generous fixtures at hand for both of these players. With Brighton in particular, after Ipswich and Forest, they've got Chelsea away, Tottenham at home, Newcastle away, Wolves at home. You kind of feel that with Brighton, it doesn't really matter who they're playing. The way that they're structured, they could pretty much score against anyone. So, yeah, it's a bit risky having both João Pedro and Danny Welbeck, but I see the value in having both. Couldn't decide who I'd go for, and of course, it could be that eventually there's managed minutes for one or the other, but for the time being, with what I've seen, I'm willing to have both in my FPL team. Now, on to my next player, and it's another premium player in this instance, so you can just find him here. There we go, Cole Palmer of Chelsea. He, of course, had a sensational 23-24 season where he racked up a staggering 35 goal involvements. Of course, he had a price tag of 5 million last season, and he's, of course, now 10.6 million in FPL. He's yellow flagged at the time of recording. Of course, in terms of the international break, he didn't feature as well. From what I understand, I'm happy to basically have him. Of course, he's got the generous green block run of games from Bournemouth, West Ham, Brighton, and Nottingham Forest as well. So I wanted to basically have some sort of attacking Chelsea cover. I basically feel that pretty much all of the assets are rotation risks. Palmer's probably the only one that is fixture proof, and crucially, if I'm not mistaken, he's not even in the Europa Conference League squad for the group stages. So that further validates that if he is fit, he'll almost certainly start for Chelsea in the league games. So on to my next player now that I've selected for my final FPL draft, going to Bournemouth, and it's Semenyo. There we go. So let's just confirm him there. So with Semenyo, he's, again, without even looking at the stats, he's racked up a very healthy XGI this season, no doubt. And with him in particular, I'd say that like he's definitely stepped up and filled that void left by Dom Solanke in the Bournemouth team, and was listed as a forward last season, now as a midfielder. And just from the positioning that you see from the eye test, you could say that at 5.5 million, he's got that out of position potential as well. Bournemouth's fixtures are a bit tricky as well initially, but he's got a few green block games. I don't want to call him fixture proof. Of course, he isn't that, but I feel that with him, there's the option that if I really needed to bench him, then I probably could. But more often than not, I'd want to start him. So Semenyo is the other midfielder in my team, and onto my defense now. And I do have a surprise, by the way, that you're probably thinking, is that it with the attack? Well, just wait till you see who my sub one is. So onto my next defender. I'm going to Manchester City, and someone who did make the cut, I believe, for my updated draft. It's Rico Lewis. Of course, he's been deployed as an inverted fullback. Pep seems to like him. Risk of X-Mins with Champions League around the corner, and the way in which other players we manage by Pep as well. But I just feel that the upside, the amount of times I've seen him in the final third and even in the penalty box at times for both England and Man City, it almost seems crazy not to own him as well when he's less than £5 million. And yeah, there might be matches where he might not play at all, might have a cameo as well. But I feel that, I think for the time being, I'm hoping that, not that his position is locked, but there is significant value and he should hopefully get some more starts in the Premier League. Again, a riskier pick compared to Semenyo, Salah, Palmer, Haaland and Trent, but one where there is a considerable amount of upside. Brings me on to my next defender, going to Aston Villa. And this was a trickier pick for me. I've gone for Konsa. Again, I hope I'm not jinxed by the fact that I had Kwanzaa for Liverpool, and he then obviously had significant X-Men's issues and his price absolutely collapsed. Konsa, of course, very strong on minutes last season, doesn't really possess that attacking prowess compared to other defenders in that price point, such as Luca Dean. But then with Dean, there is that risk of rotation eventually. You've got Maatsen there as well. You've got Champions League football as well. With Konsa and Aston Villa, they've got those generous green block games that are going to kick in from game week 4 up until game week 9. And he's someone, if I wanted to, wouldn't have any issue benching as well in the event of a red block game. And that's the plan, basically, that with this draft, I'm almost always going to have a playable sub 1. So again, I'm not showing who that other midfielder is and my other 2 defenders, but you'll see what I'm basically getting at with the amount of rotating I want to do. But with my sub 1, constantly someone who I'd basically worry, but in terms of losing points on the bench, sub 2 and sub 3, it's a bit more relaxed. But I want, basically, with this draft, to have some longevity, and it means having a playable sub 1, a very strong playable sub 1 at the very least. So on to the final defender to complete this starting 11, someone who actually, to be fair, was in my team from game week 2 onwards, is Anthony Robinson. So there we go. Brought him in as my Kwanzaa replacement, and he's done remarkably well with some attacking returns. And I've got no doubt that with a few more good performances, his price will continue to rise. So that leaves me with my goalkeeper. And now with the goalkeeping situation, this was one of the trickier positions to fill because, of course, I had Flecken and Valdemarson. I experimented with David Raya as my goalkeeper, but it meant that I'd basically weaken my sub 1 and also effectively start a 4.0 defender, which I haven't completely ruled out, having two 4.0s, but I didn't want to have two 4.0s and I didn't want to start a 4.0. So I wanted like balance with this draft. As I mentioned, a draft that I could basically have for a number of game weeks. Not that, oh, I've got a strong 11 and that's that, but a team where I could basically flip in, flip out players based on the 15 that I already have. So it basically left me with the 4.5 bracket once again when I realized that David Raya might be a push too far. And I considered having Henderson and Valdemarson, even Verbruggen, but then there's that risk of rotation with Brighton's goalkeepers. I literally went back to Flecken ultimately. And with Flecken in particular, we know that Brentford have a generous run of green block games coming up, albeit not in the next two, very difficult games. So Flecken retains his spot in my starting 11. Just looking at the players that I've retained, I've got Haaland, Mohamed Salah, I've got Robinson, and I've got Flecken. All the other players are completely brand new to my FPL draft for game week 4 onwards. Formation is a bit retro and a bit unorthodox. I know it's all about the 5-man midfields, and I could have stretched it. I could have gone for like some 4.5 attacker as a dud sub 3, and I could have elevated the funds in midfield. But what I'm about to show you is the subs that I've got as well in my squad. So as you can see, I've got Valdemarson as the goalkeeper in my previous draft, and I'm actually going to restore him because he will be my goalkeeper for my final draft as well. I've just lost far too many points when I've had a rotating goalkeeping pair last season and seasons gone by. So I've got the peace of mind that if Flecken loses form or if he gets injured, Valdemarson is there, and Brentford have that generous run of games that will come up from game week 6 onwards. So fairly content there. Onto the 5th defensive position, bit unorthodox. I've gone for Jan Bednarek, someone who I'd hope is pretty much a sub 3 or a sub 2 at the very best for my FPL team. And I've basically flipped out Harwood Bellis for Bednarek because I feel that he is the more experienced defender for Southampton in the Premier League, potentially might get more minutes. So I know Southampton haven't had the best of starts to the season either, but I feel that with him, he's just there in the background, might potentially start him for the odd match as well if need be, but he is that 5th defender to complete the back line. Now, onto the midfield and where I've gone for in terms of funds. So let's just go straight to Brian Mbeumo. I've picked him, £7.1 million. So he didn't appear in the starting 11 for game week 4, but the reason behind that is it's Man City at the Etihad. So if there is one match I'm going to bench Mbeumo, it'll basically be for that match, 4-3-3. But then you look at the fixtures for Brentford after that: Tottenham away, West Ham, Wolves, United, Ipswich, Fulham, Bournemouth, Everton, Leicester, right up until the end of like November. Healthy run of games where I'd basically want him. And of course, I've got two Brentford goalies and I've got Mbeumo, so I'm locked out of having any more Brentford players. I really hope that Wissar or some other Brentford player doesn't go absolutely mad for fancy returns. But yeah, Mbeumo, it's just for that first match back after the international break that I wouldn't start him because of the super difficult game. but I'm going to basically just have him there. Again, 4-3-3 will not be the default formation. It will be 3-4-3 essentially, but in this instance, I've got to basically bench him, but there he is. And yeah, Harry Winks, no surprise there, is the 5th midfielder in my team. And just to show you in terms of funds, 0.2 million in the bank. Effectively, I've maxed out the budget. The 0.2 is probably the amount that I've gained in price rises since the start of game week 1. Could I have pushed to a Rodgers or an Onana, who I did actually have in my previous draft? I probably could, but at the same time, I didn't want it that I've got to then force myself into considering a sub 2. I easily had a draft where I had a playable sub 1, almost playable sub 2, and even a playable sub 3, but just the risk of losing points on the bench was a massive concern for me. So I'm going to now show you the view, how it looks like in terms of the starting 11 as well. And I'll do a quick SWOT analysis as well. So Flecken in goal. Of course, 2 difficult upcoming games. Hopefully he'll rack up the save points in that period, and then generous run of green block games. And then onto that defense. This defense is a very beefed up version to what I had at game week 3. Gone for a premium in Trent, the upside in Rico Lewis, the X-Mins in Konsa, and the durability in Robinson. So with those defenders, for the most part, after game week 4, I'll be not benching Trent, but it might be that Lewis gets benched literally by Pep. Might have to bench Konsa at times or Robinson at times. So basically between Lewis, Konsa and Robinson, I'd have to start at the very most, hopefully, just 2 of them. So I wouldn't have to go for a 4-man defense constantly. Mohamed Salah, Semenyo and Palmer make up the midfield, which many FPL managers will say it's quite light. I would say that I've oddly enough spread funds and hopefully have justified it by having a stronger sub 1. The front line of Welbeck, João Pedro and Haaland. Let's see how long this bandwagon lasts for. I think it's very risky, but let's see what happens. It's just it's gone more on instinct in having both. Couldn't decide who to get. If I had to choose between Welbeck and Pedro, I probably would have stuck with Pedro, but then there's no other forward who I would have considered other than Welbeck. And there is one actually, and it's Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And I could potentially still flip out Welbeck for Calvert-Lewin, but my thinking was actually keep Welbeck and Pedro for the next 2 game weeks, and if they then don't both do well, then I could perhaps get Calvert-Lewin. So he's really the only other forward I'd consider in that price range. Jamie Vardy, probably not, but it's really Calvert-Lewin or Welbeck or Pedro, but probably Welbeck in his place after this game week. This game week and game week 5. Onto that bench now. So Valdemarson, so no issues with goalkeeping situation. And Mbumo just as the very heavy sub 1 for game week 4, and then Winks and Bednarek for the fodder, the cameo points, and just there to basically be my enablers. If I was doing a SWOT analysis of this team, I'd say in terms of strengths, I've got a premium in each of the important positions, so fairly pleased with that. And I'd say that this is a very balanced team, albeit coming on to the weaknesses, the midfield is somewhat lacking in the sense that I haven't got a solid 4-man midfield or a solid 5-man midfield here. I think that is a bit of a concern. In terms of the other weaknesses, no Arsenal cover, no Spurs cover as well. So I'm basically hinging on the fact that really Arsenal have got a difficult run of games. So hopefully these players can basically cover off not having Arsenal. But one thing I can do is flip out Palmer for Saka once the generous run of games kicks in for Arsenal. And if Saka is showing form, that wouldn't be a massive issue. And I've got a simple flip over there from Palmer to Saka. In terms of the opportunities, I think lots of upside here with having Rico Lewis, having Semenyo as a potential out of position player, having double Brighton attack, which I've literally seen in no other content creators draft, and also having a very strong sub one. Okay, it's Mbumo in this instance, but it might be Semenyo or a Robinson or a Rico Lewis in future game weeks, but it just shows you the depth that my team has. So fairly content with that. In terms of threats to my team as well, I think the goalkeeping situation could be somewhat lacking, where I'm literally relying on this Brentford combo and hoping that they get some clean sheets. Of course, if Brentford don't keep clean sheets and other goalkeepers and other combinations do better, I'm going to lose out massively. But that's the risk I'm prepared to take, hoping that I don't need to make any goalkeeping transfers for the time being, at least anyway. And in terms of other threats to my team as well, the lack of Newcastle could be problematic to my squad as well. That I've literally got rid of Isak when he's been scoring on it during the international break, and also he hasn't been too bad for Newcastle either. I don't have Gordon as well. I think I'm 0.1 million from having Gordon instead of Mbumo. So again, need to give that some food for thought as well. But I think on the whole, it's very different, but it's like balanced as well. So you've seen pretty much all of my drafts during preseason and also my wildcard drafts. They've been a bit lopsided. This is probably one in which I've invested fairly heavily in the defense. Let me know in the comments what you think. Have I got the balance right? Have I got the balance wrong? Is this too unorthodox? And like I've said, I'm hoping this is my final draft, but if we get any last minute injury news or team leaks, then no doubt I might make some tweaks. But realistically speaking, the goalkeeping combination I think is pretty much set. Trent is set. Defense fairly set as well. Midfield starting as it is set. It's really the I don't know what to call it, the problem situation that I've got. It's that sub one situation. Do I want Mbumo as a sub one? In the long term, I don't, but he's just there for game week 4. There's so many options really at 7.1 or less. Your Mitomas, your Minters, your Ezers, Bernardos. There's so many I could call out, but Mbumo purely because of the void he's filled in Tony's absence, and same with Semenyo and the void he's had to fill to some degree with Solanke leaving Bournemouth in a different capacity altogether. So as always, if you're able to like, share and subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated. And like I've said, if I do change this draft between now and the Game Week 4 deadline, I'll do my best to post it under this video or on my X channel. Take care and all the best.